This is Greg Orloff with IIoT World, and I'm here today with Todd. Ian is the IoT practice lead for the Security Services Group at BlackBerry. Good morning, Ian, and welcome.
Morning. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Now, Ian, BlackBerry, they have a large offering in security solutions for the embedded space. And I know you folks touch on a bunch of different industries spanning automotive to industrial to medical, defense, aerospace, transportation. I think you even touch on robotics. But what I wanted to talk to you a little bit about today is some of your activity and the developments that are going on in the global automotive market. So I guess my first question is, there's a document out there, it's WP.29. What is WP.29?
So it's a great question. I mean, this is the kind of the big automotive regulation that we're seeing on the horizon now. And you know, long story short, this is kind of the first internationally harmonized cybersecurity regulation. It's a little bit of a mouthful, but essentially what this means is it's a large development in the way in which cybersecurity is embedded into the automotive industry. And we're looking at everything now through the entire life cycle of a vehicle's production, understanding risk, responding to incidents, governance. So there's a lot of expectations in this regulation. We tried to break it up into 4 areas, if you like, and this might help, I guess, understand the regulation a little bit more. It's about managing cybersecurity risk. Like I said, it's about design and having security by design built into the very genesis of the projects. It's about detecting and understanding and responding to incidents. And it's also about providing safe and secure software updates, and that this information is not compromised.
So is it coming out of the European Union? I guess where's the origin of the document coming from?
Yeah, so it's a UN-driven regulation. We're seeing this having a large impact on Europe, as you'd expect, the UK, Asia, but we are also expecting to see this over the next 12 months or so have an impact in North America as well as China. So similar to things like the GDPR, where it was a Eurocentric regulation, it still had a large knock-on effect throughout the rest of the world, and we expect WP.29 to be very similar in that regard.
So what does that mean fundamentally then for the automotive industry? I mean, how's it going to impact their business on a day-to-day basis or in the longer term?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few interesting challenges there. I think for the OEMs and the tier ones, that they're fundamentally going to have to show how they manage cybersecurity risk. And the reason for this is they have to be certified now by an approval authority to allow the cars into the markets that are covered by the regulation. So we're going to have to see things like documentation around the supply chain, understanding the software bill of materials, the SBOM, as we call it. As I mentioned, how to respond to an incident. So thinking about the forensics capabilities. And like I said, things like the secure software update. So there's lots of interesting challenges there, as well as the technical components of this regulation, which is things like malware detection, which is on the whole quite a new thing for OEMs and tier ones to consider in this kind of context.
So it sounds pretty in-depth then. What are some of the steps that the auto manufacturers can take to make sure that they're ready for this? I mean, as it rolls out?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things that I think they're going to have to do and to do slightly differently. I mean, the first and I guess foremost is understand what their risk looks like. Understanding that risk, profiling that risk, mitigating the risk is important. Ensuring, again, as I mentioned, having security by design. This is an incredibly important thing throughout all kinds of cybersecurity regulations, data protection regulations. Having the documentation in place is a big thing as well, and ensuring they have the correct documentation there. And like I say, making sure the supply chain is looked after, is understood, and this can be done through professional services or through things like binary scanning. There's lots of ways that we can try and do that.
So this is, just so I understand, and this is not a self-declaration type of a program. You have to go through a conformity assessment organization to have this blessed. Is that correct?
Exactly, yeah. There's an approval authority that will certify the OEMs compliant with the regulation, which will then allow them to release the cars into the markets that are covered by WP.29.
Got it. So how does WP.29 compare then to some of the other cybersecurity documents that are out there, say ISOs, 21434?
Yes, I mean, it's a good question. So I think the way that we have to think about this is, WP29 is a regulation, and that's similar to something like GDPR, for example, which is essentially legal guidance. And there's lots of ambiguous wording in there, and you'll see things like appropriate cybersecurity is often put in these documents. Now, frameworks like ISO 21434 and 27001 and others, they provide you with kind of the blueprint, if you like, to what is appropriate cybersecurity. So they can give you the best standards, what we expect to see in terms of global best practice. So ISO 21434 kind of unlocks this, if you like, and gives you the right frame to go out and make sure you're compliant with the regulation.
So, being that you folks delve into a bunch of different industries, I mean, are there any other lessons from other security regulations in different sectors that the auto sector can leverage or take advantage of?
Yeah, I mean, I think GDPR is a great example, actually, of where you can look at some of the struggles that enterprises had in complying with that data protection regulation and the journey that they had to go on. So I think, I look at embedded systems, I look at the automotive industry, and lots of the challenges that they're facing now with WP29. It is very, very similar to what enterprise faced from a GDPR perspective 3 or 4 years ago. So, things like understanding your unknown unknowns. There's lots of things happening in a vehicle. There's lots of complexities there. There's ECUs, there's IVIs, there's a huge amount of different pieces of software and components. Well, do you understand what your risk looks like? Do you understand all of the things that are going on there? And this is very similar to the struggles enterprises had with the GDPR and understanding where all their personal data resides. And another key area, again, from the GDPR was, well, we have to start building documentation now to govern the way in which we keep our cybersecurity resilient and everything else. That's going to be the same for WP29. I think there's a lot of good practice happening. How much of that's documented and can be given as evidence to a regulator or to an approval authority is probably slightly lacking. So I think that documentation is a key piece as well. And then again, thinking about the GDPR, there was lots of inherited risk from the legacy networks and legacy contracts. Okay. And we suspect it's a very similar thing for WP29, where we think there'll be legacy contracts that probably contain certain contractual clauses that don't match up to what the expectations are now between the tier ones and the OEMs. So do they need to be looked at, changed, and improved on?
So what's BlackBerry doing to help these companies? I mean, what's your industry play, if you will, for this? What do you bring to the table?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think what we're trying to do is take a bit of a hybrid approach. And I think, talking about what have we learned from other regulations, we are looking at other regulations, other frameworks. We've amalgamated them into a nice readiness assessment. And I think this is important. So we've built out a readiness assessment, which allows you to understand your current maturity levels in relation to the regulation. And what we do is we combine our professional services consultants, so kind of the humans that go out there and do the work, as well as our technology through BlackBerry Jarvis, and we do some binary scans. And this gives you quite a clear and pragmatic picture of, well, these are the things that we're doing well, these are the things that we're not doing so well, and this is what the roadmap looks like going forward. And we can put timelines around that. So I think that's very important.
Got it. So you got at least a consultative approach. You can help organizations out. Very good. Exactly. So let me ask you another question then. In terms of, I guess, do you see other industries? A lot of times things will start in the automotive sector, then kind of matriculate out to other industries. Do you see this migrating, kind of what's going on in the automotive and going into some other industry verticals?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's inevitable, isn't it, really? We're seeing, similarities in the medical industry. The FDA are pushing different frameworks, and you'd expect to see that in the medical side. We're now talking quite a lot with governments around their long-term strategic thinking around how to secure vehicles, autonomous vehicles. I think the really interesting thing is going to be looking at things like driverless taxis and drones, and we're seeing a big push down that pathway now. Well, how do we adapt what we have in WP29 to driverless taxis, drones? It's going to be a really interesting set of challenges. Now, what's always important to remember is our technology moves at a very quick rate. The regulations, unfortunately, don't move quite as quickly. So you'll probably find that there's driverless drones in a few years' time that are ready to go to market. I know that they're starting to see this in the Middle East now. The regulations will still be 3 or 4 years behind. And that's always been the way it's been. GDPR was 3 or 4 years behind at least everything else that was going on. So it takes a while to catch up.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for sharing the insight. It's going to be exciting to watch this evolve and manifest over the next 2 to 5 years or even 10 years.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I think it's going to be interesting. I think there's going to be some challenges, But I think fundamentally it's all moving down the right direction. We want things to be more secure. We want things to be more safe. And this is how we do it.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you for joining us today.